Philosophers search for truth. Philosophers were lovers of wisdom, and their job was to search for the truth. They wanted to find out if the universe was subject to absolute and unchanging laws, and they wanted to understand those laws through logic and reason, so common sense. 1 plus 2 equals 3, and so on and so forth, going from A to B to C. The Sophists were a little bit different. They had radical views for their time. They did not believe in any gods at all. And they believed in the unexamined beliefs about traditions, values, and justice. When we hear about the term sophist today, we think of people who argue a losing point of view. That's the sophist point of view, which is a little bit different than we're probably used to. Is usually want to argue from a point of superiority. The sophists would argue from a point of inferiority. Socrates, he challenged the sophists. He said that there were absolute standards for truth and justice. That they weren't just abstract and that they weren't relative. That there were hardcore, this is good, that's bad, and here's why. He also challenged people to go farther and question their own selves and their moral character, and is quoted with saying, "The unexamined life is not worth living." In 399 BC, at the age of 70, he was put to death. He was from Athens. He was put on trial for corrupting the youth and neglecting the gods, and was found guilty, and as a result had to drink hemlock poison and died. Here is a bust of Socrates. Plato, he was a student of Socrates, and he wrote down conversations of Socrates. So his book is a conversation between between students and Socrates. Socrates poses a question, the students answer, Socrates responds, and that's what the book goes like. In the 370s, he also wrote a book called The Republic, and this was an idealized, perfectly governed society. In it, there were farmers, artisans, warriors, and a ruling class. And everyone had their place in society. And he also said that whoever had the greatest insight and intellect would be chosen as a philosopher king. His ideas dominate philosophic thought in Europe for 1,500 years. Here is a bust of Plato. Aristotle. He was a student of Plato, and he questioned the nature of the world and human belief, thought, and knowledge. He also summarized the knowledge of his time, so what other people were thinking. And he used logic to argue. So not just I'm right because I say so, or you're wrong because you're an idiot, but by saying I'm right because of X, Y, and Z, you're wrong because of A, B, and C. His form of logic and reasoning was applied to psychology, physics, and biology, and becomes the basis for the scientific method that is still used today. His pupil was Alexander the Great, who will come to conquer the known world of the time. Here is a bust of Aristotle. Next, we'll talk about Alexander the Great and his empire. Before Alexander the Great, his father, Philip II of Macedon, began to build power in Macedonia, which is to the north of Greece, and several mountain villages. It's a colder climate than Greece and very rough terrain. They saw themselves as Greeks. The Greeks looked down upon them as second-class people, kind of inferior, not equal to them. In 359 BC, Philip II came to power at age 23. He was a brilliant general and a very ruthless politician. Someone got in his way, he had no problem cutting them down. Here we see a map of Alexander's empire, which will be coming to play later. I'll explain it now. Here's Macedonia. It's to the north of Greece. This is Greece here. It's about the northern border of Greece right here. So Philip conquers Greece. Then he is killed, and his son Alexander inherits that, puts down a rebellion in Thebes, puts down that, and then he goes on the warpath. He goes into Persia, conquers all of Persia, travels down, conquers Egypt, then continues on with the Persian Empire here into Persepolis. Then he actually goes into parts of India. So he conquers all of the known territories at that time in the world. Yes, there's still more. You have Russia up here. He doesn't really go into Europe and he doesn't make it all the way to China. But for his time, this was a huge, huge success. Alexander was never defeated in battle. And that is a bust of Alexander there. Philip, his father, we'll go back there a minute, organized peasants in Macedonia into a well-trained army. So he took these people, undisciplined, no idea about warfare, and made them into the world's premier fighting force. He changed the phalanx. He made it 16 men across and 16 men deep, so basically a square. And he changed things, and he gave them an 18-foot pike. Everyone else at the time was using a spear, which is between 7 and 8 foot long. These 18-foot pikes, they'd be heavier, they'd be harder to control, harder to maneuver with, but if you could train with them and become proficient in their use, you can engage the enemy more than twice as far away with your pike than with their spear. So that meant you could kill the enemy before they could even come close to killing you, which would give you a huge advantage in battle. And he used the phalanx, just like the Greeks, to crush formations, and then use cavalry to flank and outmaneuver the sides and destroy any enemy that would come in their way. As I said, Philip then conquered Greece. Why? The Greeks couldn't unite with themselves. They were individual city-states. They didn't get together. Athens and Thebes eventually combined their forces, but too little, too late. The Battle of Chaeronea ended Greek independence. Macedonia conquered all of Greece, and that was the end of it. However, in 336 BC, Philip was stabbed to death by a former guard. After that, Alexander declared himself king of Macedonia. Alexander will then go on to defeat the entire Persian Empire, something the Greeks never did. He was 20 years old when he came to power. Aristotle was his teacher, and he kept a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. What do you think that tells us about Alexander, about his character, about his motivation for conquering the world? Answer that in your notes. As a child, he was a prince, so he went through military training. How to form ranks, what type of formations to use in battle, so on and so forth. When he becomes king, the Thebans rebel. They think this is our time to become independent. They revolt against Alexander, and he crushes them. 6,000 Thebans were killed. Everybody left was sold into slavery, man, women, and child. What this was a message to everybody else that if you revolt against your king, this is what will happen to you. It's meant to keep everybody else in line. Next, Alexander goes on an invasion of Persia. In 334 BC, he leads 35,000 troops across the Hellespont in Anatolia, the same place where Xerxes crossed into Greece. 40,000 Persians were quickly mustered and sent to defend the empire, and they fight Alexander at the Battle of Granicus River. Alexander personally led the cavalry in an attack and completely crushed the Persians. They didn't know what had hit them. Darius III, the king of Persia, then raised another army, somewhere between 50 to 75,000 troops. Alexander had a plan to defeat them, though. He put his finest troops in the front line. Why? So that they could break the Persians' front line, and then their job was not to wait for reinforcements to come in and break the battle line. It was to continue to run through and assault and try and destroy Darius the king. When Darius sees these troops break through the line and come at him, not fight the army itself, he flees. When the rest of the Persian army sees their king flee, run away, retreat, they try and do the same. As a result, Alexander's army completely mows down any Persian in their path. At this point, Darius sends peace envoys to negotiate terms with Alexander. He says no and continues to conquer more territory. This is the point where he jumps down into Egypt. He defeats the Persians' armies there, and the Egyptians see him as a liberator, as in thank you for getting rid of the Persians. They make him pharaoh, and he makes the city of Alexandria. He made several Alexandrias throughout his empire, but the one in Egypt is the one that is most known and recognizable. Darius then pulls out all the stops. He raises an army of 250,000 men. and decides, now I'm going to get rid of this upstart Macedonian once and for all. The two armies meet at the Battle of Gaugamela. Alexander launches a massive phalanx attack. So those pikers up front, shoulder to shoulder, heavy infantry to attack the Persians, followed immediately by a cavalry charge. So they hit them up front, pull back, the cavalry come in, it destroys the Persian line. Darius again panics and flees, and basically the Persian army is destroyed, ending Persian power forever. Alexander is then able to take Babylon, Susa, and the capital of Persia, Persepolis. Every time he takes a city, he distributes the wealth of the city to his troops, so his troops love him. While in Persepolis, a fire breaks out, burns the city to the ground, and Alexander refuses to rebuild it. He continues on with his march. Here we see an artist's rendition of the Battle of Gaugamela. Now, it seems like a lot's going on. There's no depth to this. It's carved right into the stone, so everything's on top of everything else. But you can see kind of the disorder, the things that are happening in the battle. So you see everything on top of each other. You can kind of see this is most likely Alexander, based on how he's dressed versus everyone else, and the fact that you have an eagle, a bird, adorning above him, watching out from almost like a guardian angel, and you see the Persians just being routed, mowed down, and retreating away. So Alexander's other conquest. He pursues Darius. He knows that if he does not get rid of Darius, capture him, or kill him, that he will try and take back his empire. Darius is eventually found dead. His closest advisors killed him, offered the body to Alexander, who was very upset by this prospect because he wanted to do it himself. And after that, he continues east to conquer more. In 326 BC, he entered the Indus Valley, which is in India. He beats an Indian army, marches another 200 miles further into India. He wants to continue, but the rest of his troops do not. They have low morale. They had marched 11,000 miles. They had gone over deserts. They had withstood monsoons. They had seen their friends die. They were tired of fighting. They wanted to go home and enjoy the fruits of their labors, enjoy the spoils of war. So in 323 BC, Alexander's army reached Babylon. At this point, he wanted to unify his empire, cement it in stone, but he died at age 32 of a fever, possibly caused by syphilis. His top generals then battle each other for control of the empire, and three main generals rise and take control of three separate areas, and that's how the empire is broken down. Antigonus takes Macedonia and Greece, Ptolemy takes Egypt, and Seleucus takes the old Persian Empire, which will become the Seleucid Kingdom.